And I'm gonna be high.
Good on you, Donald. I'm the Rocket Man, yeah.
I'm a rocket man. And I'm gonna be
Rocket Man.
I'm a rocket man.
Matt Silver, thank you for joining Let's Talk Logistics podcast. Where are you calling in from? Chicago?
Yes, I'm in the northern suburbs of Chicago.
All right. And you are playing dad today. We just were talking earlier. You got the kid home, parent teacher conferences. So you're
Yep.
building a company and you've got a young kid. You're doing it all. Take
Yep.
me through. I know you don't need an introduction. Your last name is Silver. You're Matt Silver. You've sold the company. You started an awesome one. You spent 10 years at Coyote. A lot of people in the industry know you. And I think that's partially due to your success, but also because you're very prolific on social media by intention. I don't think that's an accident. And so people know who you are. But let's tell a little bit of origin story. You were from Coyote. I think everybody can understand Coyote. But take me through the last days at Coyote and how you end up starting Forager and maybe why you named it that. I thought that was an interesting story in the banter.
Yeah. So spent about a decade at Coyote. I started there when I was 19. Initially calling on busy paper freight from Staten Island, New York to Worcester, Massachusetts. So I had to cut my teeth like any carrier sales rep would. Also did tracking, but ultimately ended up building out the Mexico business while I was there. And then spent a year focused on Canada and left in 2018. But while we were there, obviously Coyote had been acquired by UPS in 2015. And so during my time there, I started to help sell Mexico to UPS customers and work within the UPS org structure. And it was at that point that I started to uncover these really unique opportunities. And we had an executive at UPS, Matt Connolly, started to call me the Forager. And that became my nickname that ultimately stuck. And so when I left Coyote in 2018 and ultimately ended up deciding to start Forager, the first name that came to mind was Forager. And so started it actually originally as Forager Logistics. The plan was to build a cross-border freight brokerage, build our own technology, and ultimately we built what is effectively a cross-border digital freight brokerage. So something similar to a Convoy or an Uber Freight, but focused on cross-border freight. We had built our own shipper portal where customers could get quotes and book loads online, our own carrier portal where carriers could book those loads, and we had our own TMS that supported it. We had really, really big brand name customers because you could get your foot in the door with a shipper when you were hyper focused on something really specialized and unique like Mexico freight, knowing that it was a much bigger pain point for them than their traditional domestic business.
53-foot dry vans from Chicago to Dallas, maybe not as much.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that still go for $2,100?
Yeah, I think it's the same. I don't know.
So like, I think it's 860 miles.
It's not like you've done it before.
No. And so we use that to build up Forager and focus on building it with that niche focus, and ultimately got acquired by Arrive Logistics in January of 2022. That became their Mexico business. And then I left in September of 2023, took a few days off, went to the Northeast with my wife and son, enjoyed, the changing of the leaves and all that stuff in Vermont. And then went and started Cardo, raised a $3.2 million pre-seed round that Ty Finley at Iron Spring led with Zenda Capital, Wishoff Ventures, Sea Hill Bloom, Craig Fuller, a bunch of other entrepreneurs and angel investors, and then my brother included. And then went and started the business, went and found a co-founder. Convoy died right around the same time, and I met Rylan.
Yeah. Interesting timing.
Oh yeah, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. We completely aligned on the vision for what the industry needed from a technology perspective. We aligned on how to build a business, how to build it culturally, how to think about building a combination of both. Most of the company is distributed, but we have an office in Chicago with a sales team and success, and part of our carrier team there. And so we've it's been a really good fit in terms of our backgrounds, our skill sets, and our experiences. And we walked into this both with chips on our shoulders around the outcomes of previous businesses. And so, started the business, brought a handful of engineers with us, and we launched the V1 of the load board on April 1st of last year.
And Cargado, I'll get into it in detail because it's new enough that not everybody knows what it is, and the people who do maybe don't know the newest features because you're releasing and shipping product all the time, I assume, when you're building a load board or type product. But just a high level description: it's a load board for cross border freight, Mexico and Canada.
So right now it's for anything moving in and out of Mexico. So it could
Mexico.
be Mexico, US, US, Mexico, Mexico, Canada. It's and load board is the easiest term for people to understand and for it to land. But in reality, brokers can post both loads and lanes. So
Oh, really?
whether it's a spot shipment, and I love that coffee, the coaster for the coffee, by the way.
Yeah, it's good branding,
Um,
but it's actually Monster Energy drink today, so I just hide it in a coffee mug.
even better. And so brokers can post loads and lanes. So you can post a single shipment that you have to cover today, tomorrow, or next week, or you can cover something consistent and repeating. So it could be a lane moving 3 loads a day, Monday through Friday, from Monterey to Dallas, automotive parts. You're trying to get dedicated capacity on it. You can communicate to carriers
And
that it's
source
moving
through it.
consistently.
That's
Exactly.
cool.
You can source dedicated capacity. The other piece of it is that you can also source for potential freight. So one of the things that we've heard a lot of complaints about is traditionally when brokers and carriers match through historical or older load boards, a lot of that freight might not necessarily be real. And so what we've given brokers is the ability to post potential loads and potential lanes, which is similar to, for those that have worked at some of the bigger brokerages, a non-com or a can get that says like, hey, I don't own this load yet. I'm trying to find a truck in hand, or I'm trying to find a carrier for this lane that this customer is offering me. And so we've seen brokers post essentially RFPs and source them through our marketplace. So it's a load board when it comes to talking about it from a marketing standpoint, because that term lands the easiest with people, but it's also, a marketplace. And people have mixed feelings about that term in this industry. And so
Yeah.
it just depends
Digital
on,
freight matching marketplace 3.0
yeah.
is what it is.
I mean, we are people are matching digitally through our marketplace,
Yeah.
but it is there's bidding that happens through our platform. There's negotiation, and there are a lot of other cool things that we're working on right now that are going to expand that experience dramatically beyond just saying yes or no on a rate and agreeing to it.
Yeah. There's a lot of topics I want to cover today, but one of them is uniquely you started Cargado and you've already exited a business. And most of the folks I've brought on are currently in their role. Or actually, I think I interviewed Don from Green Screens like the week after they
Hmm.
announced that Triumph Business Capital, but it was pretty much, oh, it happened. Can't talk much more than that. But I do like to talk about, in my personal life and in business, I love talking to people who have sold a business and understand why they did it, how that all went down, how long it takes. Because if every founder wants to eventually sell, or they want to build a legacy business, but they should still build it to be able to be sold, or otherwise it's not stable enough anyways. That's my opinion. However, take me through. So you started Forager in 2018, sold it in 2022. Arrive Logistics, did you know those guys? How did they find out about you? Were they strategically looking for that, or they were just starting to get into the phase of they're big enough that now they have to grow through acquisition? How do you think that lined up?
So I think there's a few pieces to this. One is, um, I met Matt Pyatt and Eric Dunnigan through my brother, actually, through Andrew. There was a point where I think they were getting offered Mexico opportunities and did not have a way to support it. We didn't do anything domestic, like we refused to do domestic freight. And so there was no competition there, and they would refer occasional shippers over to us and vice versa. This was, early on. And then I think during the pandemic at some point they'd let some people go, and um, Andrew introduced Pyatt and I specifically to be able to talk and help a couple people land. And then ultimately, we try to build Forager as a tech business and as a freight brokerage at the same time. And one of the issues with doing that is that it's really expensive to build a company that way. You can't build a tech company and a freight brokerage at the same time, which I learned way too late into the process when my dad lectured me on it, when we were struggling to raise more money. And so we hit a certain point as a business where, trying to build with a whole engineering team, with product and design and data, and in addition a freight brokerage business.
Having a whole
As a
carrier
freight
sales and customer sales and success and leadership and
Exactly, all
admin.
that stuff. Yeah, pricing, finance, accounting. Like you're paying carriers every day. You're getting paid. You're collecting. Like
Oh, the whole back office motion is
all
ridiculous.
that stuff, and factoring and everything else. And so it was one of those things where like I had this realization that this whole thing was not going to scale to that venture backed outcome that you'd want normally. And we had two options, which was either to try to go sell the freight brokerage to become a pure tech company.
Transfix's play.
Yeah, and I know Drew, and we've talked about this, and like I've talked to him both before and after, and it's cool to hear like how much better he feels right now.
Yeah.
But there's you have to, like, you can't do both at the same time, and so it was either sell the brokerage or sell the whole company. And in some of the conversations that we're having, it was clear that people were not going to just buy the freight brokerage. They wanted both me and the engineering team to come with. And so as we were having these conversations, it became really, really clear that Arrive had like that same cultural alignment that I had grown up in at Coyote. And if you track that backwards, Pyatt and Dunnigan both worked at Command Transportation under Paul Loeb. And
Okay.
obviously, Backhaulers was started by Paul, and
Yeah.
ultimately my dad joined really early on. And so there's a lot of alignment there in terms of the way that the businesses and the cultures are built out. And so walking into that business did not feel foreign. It felt very collaborative. It felt like a really good fit, and it felt like the right place for Forager to end up as part of a business. And so, for me, it's a weird experience to have your company get acquired, but at the same time, you kind of go, "Hey, they bought the company; they get to do what they want with it." And
Yeah.
and so I spent uh, about a year and a half there, initially helping integrate the Mexico business and then helping lead it. And then Jess came on as the GM, and I was able to leave at the end of September 2023 and go back to building software.
Yeah.
And so it was a great, both like, it was a good learning experience in terms of understanding like how a different freight brokerage works, and learning from somebody like Pyatt and the rest of that leadership team at Arrive in terms of how strong they are from a finance and numbers and
Mhm.
analytics perspective. And like they think about everything that you can really use to scale a profitable freight brokerage business or any profitable business. And so there's still stuff that I think about today from what I learned in some of the leadership conversations there in terms of how we apply or think about analytics and how we think about the productivity of a team.
That's, I mean, some of the best in the industry to learn from. I mean, Arrive, I don't know where they're at. I think the top 100 just got released. I don't know if they're in there. They're pretty big. But they are everywhere. Every time I see a load posted, Arrive is somewhere on there. They're not
Yep.
TQL yet, but I don't think they want to be that anyways. They don't want to be known that way. But here's the thing. So you sell, then you stay for 18 months. I assume, I don't know if you can openly talk about it, but I assume that was your plan, was to not stay an Arrive employee forever. That eventually you would exit because you had sold, and there's a certain amount of time you got to stay to make sure things transition. That's how it works. Or
So,
was it the other side where
well,
you're like, maybe I'll be here forever?
I mean, I could, with my experience and like
Yeah.
personality, I on one side, yes, I could have been there for a long time. On the other side, like when I went to Pyatt and told him that Matt Pyatt, and told him I was going to leave, he said, I was wondering what was going to take you so long. So like
Yeah.
there's, and like in a very good way, it was not like, get out of here.
Yeah.
But it was, I'm a founder. I want to build stuff, and I want to be able to build technology. And there's one of the things, the biggest joy that I got at Forager a lot of the time was when we would release a new feature and hear from customers, internal users, external users, about how much they liked that feature and how it changed their experience, how quick it was to build loads, how fast it was to match on something. Anytime we release a feature at Cargado that we hear from our internal users, our external
Yep.
users, the same thing happens. Like that is just hands down my favorite part. And so I knew that I wanted to be building software, whether it was something in the freight industry or not. That kind of thought process went through my head for a long time, but ultimately realized that I had spent 17 years building and operating freight brokerages and working at at two of the largest, most successful ones ever to exist, and how could I not go take that experience and build that into software that can then help a lot more companies, including those, those existing ones, scale and launch their Mexico business.
Yeah, I think that we can get into it, but from an outsider's perspective, even just what I've heard from you today, you picked a small market and you look to control a big portion of it, right? And so there's monopolies in the world and there's monopolies in business, but it's very difficult, in fact, probably impossible, except for the few exceptions, to build a monopoly in a large market. But most people don't think about it. You can build a monopoly in a small market. And if you do
Yep.
that, it's it's actually a higher success rate than trying to do a medium-sized business in a huge market. And I know they say riches in the niches, but like that's another layer lower. Is like you can build a monopoly. That's what I'm trying to do in LTL to final mile home delivery. That's where we're trying to play. But I also refuse to do contracted truckload lanes. And we have a big enterprise retailer who works with us for our TMS. They put all their truckload through us. And they actually said, "Hey, do you want these lanes? Here's where CH and Arrive are." And I said, "No, I don't want to do that. I would lose money on those, but I will
Yep.
do your home delivery and LTL better than the others." And they still run it through our TMS. I like CH and Arrive; they do a good job, and they'll throw us a spot load here and there, and we'll cover it. But I intentionally say no to potential revenue, even though we're bootstrapped, so it would not be good revenue for us. However, when you look at it as you went from Coyote, kind of cool, you got acquired by UPS and you got to see 3 years of like how UPS runs, and then they call you Forager because you're like, hey, look at all this, all kinds of opportunity. Then you get acquired by Arrive, and I'm guessing you saw similar. They're such a large company. You're like, and then you just said, all right, this is it. I'm going to build the software to do this, and I'm going to get out of the brokerage side, pick one side of the fence. Smart side to pick, but do you code? How do you build software?
No,
You're not a developer. I can just tell by looking at you. I'm kidding.
I'm not a developer. No. So Rylan, like I mentioned, Rylan, he's my co-founder and our CTO. He's hands down the technical brains behind a lot of this, and has recruited all of our engineers. Some that he had worked with previously, some that we met through referrals or just through applying through LinkedIn or through our website, and um, he understands the technical stuff that I do not understand, but he still has the freight experience similar to what I've got, but a different part of the market. He started with Convoy in their first year, and when the company shut down, he was one of the last people at the company. He was the second most tenured person after Dan
Jeez.
Lewis. And so, yeah, so he had been there for a long time. Brian Sinclair, who joined us recently as our head of marketplace strategy, joined recently, had also been at Convoy that entire time with Ryland. So they've learned how to build out this other aspect of this industry, which is that user component of actually using software in the freight industry. And they know how to build software. Ryland in particular knows how to build software
Yeah.
and knows how to code, knows how to hire engineers, knows how to build an engineering team and a product team, and is able to build that stuff. Whereas I've got the relationships, the network, understanding the marketing strategy, the content piece of it, obviously.
Yeah.
And so we and the fundraising piece of it, that's an important part. And so we've raised 3 separate rounds of funding, and that can be a big part of the job occasionally. Although it's nice to be able to put my head down for a little bit and focus on building the business. But yeah, I feel like we are set up to be pretty good partners and have complementary skill sets.
A lot of people don't realize that there's a large chunk of CTOs or VP of technologies in freight that can't code. They're just running a technology team that's a dev team in, the Philippines or wherever the dev team is out of. Like that's a big majority. And then typically the other side of that is founder led companies, and the founder can code. But I have actually met you now, and then Jesse Buckingham from Vuma. His co-founder was at Kodiak Robotics and like was
Yep.
the third employee there, something crazy. And so I think that that's a pretty deadly matchup, or duo, to have somebody who's in the freight industry and knows what it should look like, but somebody else who can build it rather than one or the other. And I do think that a lot of people in freight, all of the largest companies and all of the mid-market companies, their CTOs can't code. they're running a team of developers offshore. And maybe we can get into this. They're going to get disrupted by companies like you that can do 10 times the output because the CTO can code and then use AI to help code and Claude and Sonnet 3.7. And then the whole outsource model of dev isn't nearly as viable. And I'm not saying you have to hire US developers. That's not my point. But having a large dev team and then having to say, hey, I got to run my cost down by going to Ukraine. That was a bad example, but that is where people went. But yeah, and then instead now it's like, oh, I need like 4 guys like Rylan, and that's it. That's the next version of building software.
Yeah, and I think there's obviously a lot of freight brokerages have CTOs and have technical teams, and whether they're building their own proprietary TMS and or not, like we want to collaborate with them and work with those guys or those groups, obviously, and there is something to be said about like having the right leadership skills to lead a large engineering team.
True.
Rylan happens to have that experience, also having been a Convoy, and so we have we're uniquely lucky in that sense. But
Yeah, he's got both.
I don't think we'd ever offshore, overseas by any means, and I don't even really want to go to Colombia with anything. But I think having a team in Mexico makes sense at some point, given what we're focused
Cardo
on
is
building.
Mexico.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, I think there's to me what I think needs to evolve in this industry, if you think about freight brokerages or logistics companies investing in technology, is that those investments in technology can become more about the right partnerships and the right integrations and the right integration strategy, and less about, oh, we build everything ourselves because
Yeah,
somebody told
exactly.
us to, because a bank told us to. And so that right CTO or CIO or VP of IT could be somebody that is more about orchestrating the right structure, the right infrastructure, whether they're building that around McLeod or Turvo or Tai or Mastery, that whole range of TMSs or Revenova, like any of those TMSs, and then they piece in Highway, and then they piece in green screens, and they pull in some of these
Genlogs and all
other,
this.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, like piecing all of that stuff together, like the orchestrator of the systems becomes more important than somebody that can code. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a range. I do think there's one other startup in this industry that I'll credit for the fact that I met Rylan, which is Goodship. If you know Ryan Soskin and David Tsai,
I don't know him, but I know Goodship.
yeah, so they were both Convoy people. That's how they met. Ryan had worked at Coyote with me before that, and had been at Stored. And David is somebody that can both code and understands the freight industry really well. And so when I was looking for a co-founder, they said, you need Rylan, and they were the ones that introduced me to him.
That's awesome. So not that doesn't happen as often in like the freight world, where it's like you build a company and then hire a co-founder, or you went and pre-seed raised and then, but in the tech world that happens a lot. And so it is kind of interesting that you took your freight experience and then like morphed it with Silicon Valley, their style of like, oh, raise and then find your technical co-founder, and then they get a piece of equity and all of the stuff. So it's kind of an interesting model. People don't think about how to build it that way very often in freight.
It's unique because of the fact that I'd built this business before, or built a business before, and
Yeah.
the fact that I had a plan and something that I wanted to build, and I had, this pitch deck that we put together was like, here's what I want to build. I didn't even initially have a name yet, and it was just like New Silver Company, and it said that we were going to bring cross border freight online and start to become, start as this load board for cross border freight before going deeper into that process. But then there was just a list of logistics companies out there that had people that work at them or lead them that I either worked with previously or that I knew through some other connection or through some, social media or whatever.
Right.
And that was the pitch. And it was, it's not normal. Not everybody's going to just go give you money to then go find a co-founder. They have to like really believe in all that stuff and know that that one piece that you're missing is the co-founder. Once that money hit the bank, the first thing I spent money on was buying a plane ticket to Seattle and go meet with Rylan. So it was not that it all happened really close together. It wasn't like I had money sitting there for 3 or 6 months and then it was just like, building stuff. Like there's nothing for me to build. I did try to download, I don't even remember what it was, but I tried to like figure out how to code something myself. And then like really quickly was like, man, I should have listened when my dad told me when I was like 13 that I should learn how to code. I should have listened. And I didn't. And
Yeah.
so I couldn't code by myself. But I'm glad now that
But now you have
Rylan and I
Rylan. Good
got
old Rylan. I
Rylan.
don't know Rylan, but it sounds like he's good. So
He's great, and we've got a whole leadership team. So like
yeah.
we have a head of operations in Julie. We've got a head of go to market who leads our sales team, head of success, head of marketplace strategy, which is supply, and head of marketing. And so that puts us in a position to really actually like grow this business and scale it, and not have to have one person juggling 5 different roles right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one, there's 2 topics. Now that we've warmed up, we can talk about tariffs and VC money. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, great.
But you had to have. So I was going to make a joke earlier. I'll pull it back to it. You said that you left in September 2023, right? That was Arrive. Then you
Yep.
went and saw Vermont Leaves, and I was going to make the joke, and then you started ChatGPT because I think it was October 2023 when that came out. So you just had a little project you launched. But the reason I was going to make that joke is that you started a software company right in the age of AI, and now you have Rylan, and I'm sure they're looking into ways to scale code and to scale front end and things like that with AI instead of just human resources. But you didn't probably, and that was a windfall for you. You're like, sweet, that is awesome, and it's going to probably be a bigger windfall in the next year than it was in the last 2. But I bet you didn't expect like this whole tariff war and nearshoring in Canada and Mexico getting the brunt of it to start. Although I don't actually know the news. Maybe you can break some for me, but I don't know if those have been backed off. Canada and Mexico kind of been like, hey, actually, we're friends again, and the rest of the world and China are bad, and the rest of the world gets a little break. Is it now back to Mexico's our friend? Where are we at with the saga?
Yes, we're
Okay,
back. Mexico's our friend. Canada's our friend. I think what came out last week was that these tariff discussions exempted Mexico and Canada from the beginning. I think when it was very specifically targeted towards Mexico and Canada in January and February. So we had our team offsite at the end of January in Monterrey in Mexico. And
interesting time
obviously,
there.
like, I know the big questions were what are going to happen on Monday when we all come back from this trip? Are we going to still have people posting their Mexico freight? Because allegedly these tariffs were supposed to happen. And then last minute, you hear about President of Mexico, President Sheinbaum, having a conversation with Donald Trump, talking about how they were resolving the issues related to drugs going into the U.S., illegal immigration, that they were getting the military involved, and that there was all this collaboration to stop it. There's been fighting with Canada this whole time. That apparently was still even not on the table to have tariffs on Canada beyond, I think, what they did with aluminum and steel. But like, ultimately, I think that's all going to settle down at some point. And so what we saw over the last 3 months has been these little spikes from every time we get close to the tariff issuance happening at the beginning of that next
Getting
month.
across the border quick.
You see a surge of volume getting pushed, and so you see rates at like that top end start to spike. But from what I went into this thinking kind of a few things. One is that the last time Donald Trump was in office, we got the update from NAFTA to the USMCA.
Yep.
It
was like
meant
a
that more
warm-up.
things. Well, it was it was an update, and it meant that more things needed to be made in North America and less needed to be made overseas, and specifically the amount of a car that was made in North America went from 62.5% to 75%. So
In
that
order to
meant
be
that
exempt from tariffs, right?
yes, to fall under the USMCA and not get taxed. And so that already drove a significant investment in North America. And we started to see that
Yeah.
nearshoring happen before 2020. And then when as Trump started to get ready to take office again, you started to hear more topics or more conversation about tariffs and about trade. And the thought was, okay, well, this is obviously going to lead to another update to the USMCA. There's going to be tariffs on China because there's always been this animosity towards China, and so we're going to see that happen. And that was kind of my thought going into like the end of January, and all of a sudden,
And
you
you
know,
were the guy, you were ahead of the curve because not that many people were even thinking about that. They were thinking about all the other things in the election
well,
cycle.
the pandemic is what scared the crap out of everybody because
Yeah, it did.
it shut everything down coming out of Asia, and so the
We
price of
don't have
containers
antibiotics, and we
skyrocketed.
don't have baby
Yeah,
formula, and we don't have
so much stuff.
diapers.
Yeah, so it made
I had a
everybody
newborn,
realize
so
that
those things were important to me at the time.
exactly, and like those were the things that make you realize that like it's not such a good idea to rely on a country so far away and with such a hostile relationship. And so
Yeah, even if they're
you
our
started to
friend, but especially if they're not. Yeah,
definitely not our friend at this point. And so
yeah.
as you start to see more and more of that fighting happen, you start to see more manufacturers move to Mexico. And so this isn't a new thing that nearshoring has been happening. It was the pandemic, it was the USMCA, it was that CHIPS Act in terms of the first iteration of that trade war with China, and the concern about the chip shortage during the pandemic. That like let's not forget about that part of all of manufacturing that in fact affected Taiwan and everything else. And so you start to see more and more reasons pile up for why it makes sense to move to Mexico. And now, where you've got tariffs, I think north of 125% on all Chinese goods, with the exception of electronics now. And you see this 90-day pause on everybody but China. We're going to see something move. I think we're already starting to see something move by Trump offering this quote unquote olive branch to China with the electronics and computers and phones and all that stuff and semiconductor chips. But we're going to continue to see that movement happen. And there was even communication today. I haven't had a chance to fully read it yet, where it talks about the fact that automakers are going to be heavily encouraged to move more and more their part sourcing to come from Mexico and Canada and less from overseas. And so as we see more and more of that manufacturing move to North America and move to Mexico, it's not happening in the United States as much as anybody would like it to.
Do you
And
think
so
that?
that's going to move to Mexico.
Do you think that in a couple of years? So you like, if I'm trying to get into the psychology of why they're doing the things they're doing, like the only conclusion I can draw is that eventually they want it to be not nearshored but reshored, and they're compromising that they don't think they can actually get it reshored. And so they're like, hey, and it's kind of like crass to say, but they're deporting as many illegal immigrants as they can, but they actually kind of need the workers. And that's the argument, right? It's like, well, if we were going to reshore, then we actually need people to work. I think it's a poor argument because it kind of dehumanizes a group of people. Like they're the only ones who should work in factories, but we can get into that separately. However, they like I think Nvidia announced today they opened 2 plants in Dallas and Phoenix, right? So they're like, and I'm not saying that that's actually how we're going to reshore, but they're at least playing the politics of like, look at us, we're going
They're
to
bringing
reshore.
it's the final assembly.
Yeah,
So
well, that's not how it's
um,
communicated though, right? And so they're kind of
I
like,
know, but like TSMC building this giant factory in Arizona, like Arizona is really close to Mexico. And so you start to see a lot of the materials that need there's a lot of like labor intensive stuff that needs hand stitching together and putting things together like harnesses and stuff like that do not make sense to be made in the US. And so I do think reshoring is a theme that some people in the current administration want. Can
yeah,
that
Lutnick
happen in
and
the next
Dissent
can
certainly
it
not
happen
in the
in the
next
next
4 years.
4 years? No. Like is it happening in the next 8 or 10, 12 years? Probably not. Like you cannot move things that quickly, especially in the United States. And
Yeah, I
so
think the only pushback, and I don't actually really have I don't have a dog in this fight because I don't know if it's a good idea to try to reshore or to nearshore. I don't really know enough to, but I know enough to be dangerous, I guess. So, but the pushback would be like Besant and Lutnick are talking about they want some industries to be made here for national security. And is Mexico always going to be our friend? I think that Mexico is so heavily reliant on the US that it's not even really a friendship thing. It's like, well, if one's reliant on the other, you get what you want in most ways. So in that case, I think Mexico will end up being a bigger trade partner in the next 4 years than they were in the last four. And then the argument can be made some of it is going to reshore, and there's going to be some companies who are going to get huge tax breaks to make their factory, which is kind of funny, in El Paso or in Phoenix or in, I
well,
guess.
because that does contribute to jobs in the U.S. and it's made in
Yeah. And it's
America.
going
And
to
like
be,
you think about Volkswagen, they have the plant in Chattanooga, and there's cars that come off that line, and Tesla in Austin and California. But like a
but Mexico's a
bunch
lot
of
of the
those
raw
parts are
material.
coming Yeah, well, the parts are coming from Mexico, and like the bigger pieces that get assembled and put together, and some of those pieces might have originally come from the U.S. and shipped down to Mexico to be assembled
Right.
there. And so, what I think you eventually see, if somebody wants to completely reshore, there needs to be a lot of investment in AI to automate a lot of that work. Otherwise, your price is going to go through the roof. And so
Exactly. That's why
you
it can't be
buy.
done in Canada either. The price would be the same.
It's too
So
expensive. Yeah, Canada is about trade. Mexico is about outsourced manufacturing. And so if you move your manufacturing to Mexico to get labor cost benefits, but you keep it in the same time zones or similar time zones, you likely have somebody on your team that can speak Spanish than Mandarin. It's like a 2 or 3 hour flight to get to most places in Mexico, or maybe 4, as opposed to 12 to 15 hours to get to Asia. And so there are so many benefits as to why it makes sense. And then yeah, you assemble the final thing in the United States, and you could say this was assembled in the U.S. or it was made in the U.S. and everybody is happy. And
yeah.
they're getting as much manufactured nearby as possible. They're keeping their costs down. The time it takes to get something from Mexico to the United States is like 3 to 6 days, not
Yeah,
three to
I think
six
that
weeks.
like that actually makes sense. And this is off topic of that, but I saw so many posts on social media about, and like I do have sympathy for it, or maybe it's empathy would be the word. Actually, hold on. I got to plug my computer in. So I guess we'll pause this for a second. Sorry about that.
All good.
All right. Where were we? What were we talking about?
Reshoring.
Yeah, so I see these business owners that have maybe Amazon reseller businesses, or they were sourcing products exclusively from China, buying it cheap, selling it expensive in the US, and their whole supply chain was dependent and their whole business was dependent on this supply chain. They're getting crushed, or at least the perception is they're going to get crushed. Hopefully, they don't go out of business, and hopefully China absorbs some of it. I saw some stories already of like people canceling orders and then the manufacturer saying, hey, or the vendor saying, hey, we'll cover the tariffs on this load. Just please ship it. We'll figure it out from there. Maybe things will get figured out, but you're talking about time, right? And that's like months sometimes at sea, or whatever the sailing schedule is between ordering it and actually getting it. And e-commerce, which is kind of my business, that's what I deal in all times, is final mile and e-commerce. That's the entire e-commerce market. Is not just China. It's Vietnam, Cambodia, India, Italy, all kinds of places, but it takes forever to get here. And so almost you have to either hold advanced inventory, which most companies don't, or you just buy something online and you wait for it to get here, unless you buy from Wayfair or Amazon. And that's why you do that, because it can deliver to your house in 3 days and there's your patio furniture. But I would assume that Wayfair and Amazon and others are going to stop sourcing from those countries and holding advanced inventory, and instead they're going to just source from Vietnam instead of China, and then they're going to hold it in Mexico. And it's not manufacturing, and so like that's what everybody talks about. But this e-commerce is a smaller percentage of the total market, but the fastest growing sector of all these goods that are never assembled or made in the USA anyways. But they're not going to be sourced from China in the long term, it doesn't seem. And
Yep.
at least, even if the tariffs go away, if I'm a business owner, I'm like, okay, I didn't have a business. I had a really good arbitrage. I was buying cheap and selling expensive, and it was one single source, and it was completely non-resilient to a tariff. Now I'm going to source from 10 countries. Now I'm going to have a bunch of product lines, or I'm going to hold inventory in advance, either way. But that's going to push some people towards holding it in Mexico or Canada. They're still not going to reshore that, because it's expensive to have a warehouse that you hold stuff in Long Beach. Very expensive. You just wouldn't do it. You'd actually end up having to ship it via container, get it into LA Long Beach, and then ship it to Colorado to store it in order to be able to afford that. But then your shipping costs get a little whack.
Yeah, you could just ship it into Tijuana and bond and hold it there in
Yeah.
bond or somewhere near there.
Yep. And then you just truckload it and you get, probably LTL. So the LTL market might win if there's, the LTL market would be really expanded if there was nearshoring to Mexico, LTL into the US. There's
Or
cross-border
parcel.
truckload, but if you can get to a warehouse in Texas, then they're going to go LTL to the rest of the US.
LTL or parcel. It just
Yeah.
depends on whether if it's like I mean, again, this is where I don't really know much about e-commerce. Furniture, sure, I don't think that's
Depends on
going
how big it is.
parcel. Yeah, but like most stuff that like I don't know, the things that like my grandma gets tricked into buying on on
Yeah, that's
Instagram
all
and
parcel. Yep.
sending to our son, like the thing that this thing came from Japan, but like similar, like the most random things ever that like end up on your door.
Yeah.
Like so that's dumping in the UPS and FedEx networks and divvying out that way. But
Or
even they
Amazon
have
network
to.
now because they stopped
Oh
using both
yeah,
of those.
yep. Well, and then like that starts to saturate networks in a very different way.
Yeah, it does.
Everything is going to have to get rebalanced over the next few months, depending on what happens long term with the tariffs.
Yeah, I would imagine that this is in a best case scenario, or I guess maybe worst case, depending on what outcome somebody wants. In a best case scenario, we actually reshore and nearshore, and like the whole supply chain is pretty much anything essential is in North America. Medicine, steel. I mean, if we need to make bullets, if we need to make medicine, if we need to make baby formula, if we need to have food, that should all be sourced as close to home as you could get. COVID showed us that, right? And then that was just a different reason. But
Yep.
the tariffs, although it's erratically done, are showing us the same thing that, like, oh, when you do a tariff on China, the whole supply chain could fall apart still. And it's like, oh, that's still where we're at. I mean, we made some progress, but we never actually.
I mean, these tariffs hit, and then all of a sudden, like everyone's like, "Yeah, you know how much it's going to cost for an iPhone or a MacBook if you want to buy a new one under these tariffs." And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you get these exemptions for electronics,
Yeah.
pretty
And although
quickly.
I heard today that maybe those weren't exempt and that Apple is going to pay it, Apple's going to pay the tariff. And there was some
Oh,
agreement, like 20%, something like that, instead of 125%. But that was
we'll
just in
see.
like the X sphere. It was from an official news source, but I have no idea what's real. All right, let me ask you a few questions about your business. So you're building,
Yep.
you go out and you raise pre-seed, then you go to seed, and then you go Series A. Series A is kind of like the big leagues, right? That's what everybody's getting to Series A. Now you're like, you raise a big round. I think you guys raised 12 million Series A. How do you go about, like, now you get to hire, I assume, with all that money, or what's your investment outlook look like? Building a team out. I heard you had a bunch of head of. Do you build the team underneath them now? Are you hiring sales and marketing? Or are you hiring engineers? Everybody, give me the playbook.
So the playbook is to leave the money in the bank for a while and not spend it like it's there. And we treated the last two rounds the same way. So like when we raised our seed round, we still had most of the pre-seed money left. With the Series A, we still had a lot of our seed money left. And so, there's we're going to take our time on hiring and hire for need and hire when we need to. It's not one of those things where we should just start hiring like we just raised $100 million round because it's a $12 million round and that's 22 million total, but like we've spent some of it. And so we will invest in sales and marketing for sure. We want to add more to our customer base pretty dramatically, and we want to build up the carrier network significantly. And
The
so,
network effect business, it gets better the bigger it gets and the more carriers that are in there.
yeah, so investing in the marketplace growth itself is critical. We charge a subscription. So we don't charge, like, we don't have a take rate. We don't take a fee on these loads or anything like that. And so we're not doing the things that previously venture backed startups did that people didn't really like the money being spent on. And so our focus is actually on the right motions and investing more when it makes sense to, like, as we ramp up salespeople and you start to see that they're proving, that they can generate revenue, you add more salespeople and continue to invest in sales at the right cadence. Now, engineering, I just talked to one of our engineers right before this, and uh, he and several of our other engineers have expressed the fact that like it's not the best experience to constantly be recruiting new engineers and hiring new engineers, because if you're always doing that nonstop, you're spending a lot of time ramping people up and less time actually producing code. And so it's more about leveraging Cursor and some of the other AI tools that everybody's got access to today to create more code, better code, no vibe coding with this product, but to build as much as possible efficiently and let the team, let them cook for right now and let them keep working instead of just trying to throw more engineers at them. And so we're going to take our time when it comes to hiring. We've brought on the right leadership. Now it's a matter of continuing to invest underneath that and build up as we see fit.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably I expected that answer because I know your brand and I've seen you post and I have an idea of what you've done and your thinking. But that's like the opposite of what most people think of when they hear Series A. In fact, I won't name names, but there are several companies that raised a Series A, and one of their founders was talking about how they can't hire enough people and they're trying to recruit as many people as possible. And I'm like, I've seen that before. And then I saw
I
2022 just lay everybody off.
Someone told me that at TIA also.
Yeah.
Like it's
It's the exact opposite playbook. So, but then I have to ask you, and I liked your answer, but it does confuse me some because why raise the 12 million in your mind then? Why not bootstrap more? Why not raise less? What's your idea with that?
So we've had this like phenomenal growth basically from when we launched the product. So it took us 8 months and 4 days to get to $1 million in ARR, which for a long time that's been
Subscription
a
ARR.
great
Really good ARR.
yes,
It's not just
actual
like
ARR.
transaction fees. You're talking subscription.
Correct. The number doesn't go up and down every month. It just goes up.
Yeah,
And
it's not
so
like you got one big shipper that pays you $100,000 a month.
yes, and if they don't ship this month, there's no volume.
Yeah, exactly. It's a subscription
And
ARR.
so
Okay.
yeah, it's real ARR. And so um where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought.
I had asked why raise the 12 million if you
Oh yeah,
didn't
sorry.
need
So
it.
we've been on this like this really strong growth track since
Yeah.
we launched the product and got to that 8 million or that million in ARR in 8 months,
Yeah.
and it's put us in a position to keep growing. And my belief is that at some point, and I've said this to our board for about 3 quarters now, um, we will zigzag. It's been up and to the right this whole time, and I've told everybody like at some point we're going to hit a bump in the road. Like there's going to be something that's going to make this harder to grow.
Yeah.
And we've definitely hit that recently actually with the tariffs and people being scared to invest in Mexico when there's tariffs happening. And now that that's calming down, I think people are starting to like invest again in this and we're seeing that growth happen. But we had a little bit of a zigzag. It didn't go down, but it just didn't scale the same speed for a month. And so although we still had like an amazing month,
Yeah.
it just felt like a little bit of a zigzag for a second finally. And so like we closed the round weeks ago. We announced it last week, but we closed it before that obviously. And so my thought was take, if the right investors are there and the right capital is there and the terms are right, take the money. It makes sense. Like put it in a bank account, collect interest on it, make more money with it, but like don't go spend it all right away. And so now that puts us in a position when we decide to raise a Series B at some point, we've got the resources. We won't feel like we've got a gun to the back of our head saying like, go, you got to go raise money.
Yeah. My dad taught me that when I was a kid. He said, or when I was in like high school, he said, if you ever need to get like raise money or take a loan, do it when you don't need money. Because that's how banking works is when you need the money the most, you'll take it and they
Yep.
will win. And I've
Yep.
learned that through Rocket. I've learned that in my personal life, all of that. Always get money when you can instead of when you have to. However, part of the concept or misconception of VC sometimes, and there's people that are, and I'm a bootstrapper, but I'm not building a tech company necessarily, right? I'm building managed trans and final mile. So when you raise VC, the critics will say, if you raise a big Series A, you're really just giving up control of the company. And if you have to, these safes and these valuations, and if you can't raise at the next valuation, it's this rat race. How do you view that, or is there on your side, do you see it differently? So when I there's a lot of critics, or maybe not a lot, but they're noisy at least, and they'll say provocative things like, hey, I saw a Series A founder post today about their Series A and I wept for them because they didn't realize the mistake they were making. And there is some stigma around VC in freight. VC in Silicon Valley is a like big industry, billions and billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. VC and freight, a lot of people think of Convoy and they think of the bad stuff that happened, and they think of some other companies I won't name that aren't doing so well right now. What's your take on, you raised a Series A, maybe you didn't even need the money. Why did you do it? Why do you raise? What's your methodology on that? If you
Yeah.
wanted to push back.
So I get why some people don't agree with the concept of raising money. If I think about, Forager and what we spent money on and how we should have raised and thought about the business, in hindsight, I should have brought on somebody with like a stronger finance background that understood how to operate a profitable freight brokerage, and we probably would have built a very different business. Again, I don't know that it would have been a venture scale business, but um, we could have built a profitable freight brokerage, and there are plenty of really successful,
Yeah.
profitable freight brokerages. And that's a great business to have if that's the focus. But when it comes to building a business that's a marketplace business like ours is, you do have to worry about speed, and you do have to like go to a certain speed. And that that was part of what the thought process was around raising money. Like, yeah, we could build this over a 10 or 15-year time frame, but if we want to become, to your point, monopolies for cross-border Mexico freight, then we want to move quickly to do that and build out that network. And now we have, 8 out of the top 10 brokers, almost half of the top 100 that are using it. And you don't do that. I did the first 50 by myself pretty much, but like, you can't really scale past that by yourself. And if you want to add the right customer base quickly, you have to think about the pricing model, and you have to think about investing in the technology piece of it. And so you need venture capital for that. Now, did I give up control of the business? No. Do we have investors that we talk to and meet with on a regular basis? Absolutely. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
see it as just having sold a chunk of the business or having given up control or anything like that. I see it more of having brought additional partners to the table. So somebody like Primary, for example, has been exceptionally helpful. Zach and Brad, I talk to them all the time. Iron Springs, Zenda have all been really helpful. Nicole has been really helpful. And then LGVP and Conversion and Assembly and Friends and Family, all of whom joined this most recent round, they all came in for different reasons and are going to add different points of value. And so um, I saw it as being able to add more people to the team and
Yeah.
to help support the business more than just uh, like, I don't feel like I report to the 40 something investors that we have as investors. I feel like we've got 40 something partners across all those entrepreneurs and more strategic investors.
Yeah, I do think that, one, I think there's a big distinction between building a marketplace and software company than building a freight brokerage. And freight brokerage is not really, well, it's very difficult to make it VC scalable because it's predicated on an exit, and that is VC world. And not all brokerages can exit for the right multiples, and then it's very difficult to get into the safes and the valuations. But it also can operate at thin margins depending on the market, and it's unstable if you lose shippers. Subscription ARR, I bet it's so fun for you to have that.
It's really nice.
Compared
We
to,
start every month not at zero. Uh,
yeah.
Obviously,
And it's
there's
probably like on Stripe or something. It just hits, and you don't have to do as much AR and AP and try to figure out who's not paid yet. It's pretty clear. There's no factor, and there's no second factor because the carrier had one. It's
yep.
a lot cleaner, I suppose. So, well, that's kind of funny too. Just a side note, Friends and Family Capital, I didn't realize was a fund. I thought you put that to like indicate Andrew and
No, no. Andrew's in the pre-seed
I have
round.
friends and family. They're in here.
No, Friends and Family Capital is a venture firm. John
Okay,
Fogelsong is one of the founders of the firm, and they've got a very strong finance and venture background.
cool.
It is a funny name though.
So you answered the VC question. I think that you're the maybe not the exception, but the way that you are running this, it sounds to me like you're going to try to build this into a profitable business, even though it's in software. Not necessarily in the short term, but that you could actually have a path to profitability and build this the way that it, some good business fundamentals that way. You could also, because it's software, only do rule of 40 and, still have a pretty big exit. But the way that I heard you talk about only hiring, when it made sense and things like that, those are more business fundamentals than they are VC growth companies. Normally it's hire as many as you can and scale. And I saw that
I would.
many, many times.
I think VCs have. First of all, there's plenty of VCs that have been on boards of really, 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 really successful companies that have had phenomenal outcomes, whether it was an IPO or an acquisition, and including some of them that sit around the table for us, which is why we have them at the table.
Yeah.
The mentality now is that you have to have some sort of plan to like have revenue and generate real like income for the business. Now, is anybody at our table today expecting us to be profitable right now? No. Do I expect us to be profitable? No. I would rather continue to invest in the business, and if there was profit to be made, I'd take that money and put it right back into the business. And so we have money from investors to continue to grow the business and ideally
Yeah.
outstrip the speed at which we would grow without investing in it. And so we want to be able to control our own destiny as a business, and that comes with having the levers that we can pull to get to profitability if we needed to, and having the customer base that believes in us to continue to ride this product and invest in it as customers, as contributors to the product roadmap, every aspect that you could think of. And so we we're not like, this isn't like that was the last round of funding, let's get to profitability and then be smooth sailing. There's going to be more work we have to do. There's a lot of expansion we want to do from a product standpoint, from a network standpoint, service within the network. So there's a lot of work to do, and we've got some work. I will tell you though that an acquisition is not the outcome that we're aiming towards. We want to build in.
That's a three letter outcome you're looking for.
Yeah, or something just enduring. If you look at how Stripe operates, where they have not had to have an IPO and they continue to
I
get
just brought
funded.
that up the last two podcasts. I mentioned those two brothers and the fact that they won't IPO, and everybody's like, please, what's wrong with you? Well, we don't have to. It's $1 trillion of payments and we're
And
profitable and we
and
don't.
their investors can cash out anytime they want to. So like they're
Eh,
like they yeah. So there are different paths, but getting this thing acquired in the next year is not one of the paths that I want to take.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, hey, let me ask you one last question. I ask everybody else, and I'll let you get back to building your company, raising your kid. Um, is there any single mistake or theme of mistakes? You've built a couple businesses. You might have a whole theme of them instead of just one that you made that if you hadn't, it's not fundamental to who you are and how you built it today. It was just a stupid mistake. And that if there's somebody else like me, somebody else building a business, they could just learn that ahead of time. Some examples have included, hey, I should have hired a lawyer to get my organizational documents set up in my operating agreement, things like that, because it cost them a bunch of money. Or it was, I always, I didn't fire fast enough. So those are some simple themes, but anything unique you've built, you're at Coyote for a decade, you've seen big acquisitions, you've been part of acquisitions, and you founded two companies. What mistake have you made that you didn't have to? And it would just be nice if you told us and somebody else could learn that and avoid that pain.
I mean, I've written that you should not build a business that's going to become a freight brokerage just to put freight brokers out of business. I've done that 100 times, and I talked about that with the FreshX guys really early on when they initially started as a reefer LTL brokerage business, and convinced them after a month to stop that, and now they're a tech company with revenue. But I think the biggest piece of advice that I would have to give. Oh God, let me think. Okay, so the most important thing to me for any other founder building a business would probably be that the right team is going to make or break your business more than anything else. That's one piece. So as you build out your team, getting the right leadership people in place, that hiring people that have been there, that have done that, that are better at that job than you are, is absolutely critical. And I feel
Yeah.
like we've nailed that with every single leadership role that we've brought into this business so far. And some of the leaders we had at Forager were great, but just might have been early in their careers. And then I think actually the most important thing, and this is a question I ask every single founder I talk to that reaches out to me for advice on stuff, is how you're going to make money as a business. Like if you don't have
Yeah.
an answer for how the money's going to come in, stop. Like it can't just be this idea that at some point, like I get the fact that you might early be thinking about like something crazy and different, but like God, have a really specific plan to how money's going to come into your bank account, because otherwise investors are not going to give you money, especially not in this market. It could
Yeah.
be AI, even with AI, like usage based. Like people know that it's going to be usage based. Like so, just there's got to be a path to making money. It might not be. You might not have three easy steps to making profitable dollars in your
Yeah.
bank account, but you have to know how you're going to get someone to give you money for your software if you want to be able to raise money.
I love it. I love that. The fact that, you had to lay it out, it seems table stakes, especially because if you just start a business and you don't raise, then you have to make money. But like, if you have a big enough idea and raising is the path, which I'm obviously tilted towards bootstrapping, but if I was going to build a software company, I don't know if I could bootstrap it. It would, if I had to, I made that up. If I had to grow it quickly, if I was okay with a 10-year growth and a profitable business, you can always bootstrap. And I love the fact that you got the kid and the dad life, and it's just like a testament to how you're building out in the open and building in public. I appreciate the advice, Matt. Where do people reach out to you? LinkedIn? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. He avoided this whole podcast recording up until the very end. LinkedIn, X, just at Matt Silver, and then I've got a newsletter where I write about cross-border freight and entrepreneurship. So I would
Congrats
subscribe
on
to that
all
too.
the progress is the name of the newsletter. It's a very good play on raising money. And I don't even raise money, and I know that is something that people say quite often.
Yep, too often.
So good for you, Matt. Hey, I appreciate your time. Keep doing big things.
Thank you.
Cargado, Mexico, cross-border load board, but it's really a freight matching marketplace. It's just easier to say load board, folks. Thanks for tuning in for another episode, everybody. See ya.